Very good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the November edition of Law Chat 2023. And after a slight technical hitch, we're all up and running here. And I'm very pleased to introduce from Australia today my guest, the General Manager of the Australian Legal Sector Alliance, Richard Jennings. Richard, welcome to Law Chat.
Thank you very much for having me, Simon.
Great pleasure. And I should just say these Law Chats are brought to us through our sponsors, Moore Markhams. We thank them as they sponsor every session on Law Chat throughout this year. They are chartered accountants and business advisors to the legal profession, specializing in financial services. So thanks to our sponsors. Now, Richard, we're going to be talking today about the issue of sustainability. It's a word that you hear, or we hear, bandied around a great deal, but I think it often means different things to different people. And I suspect you would probably agree with me that for in some quarters anyway, there is a risk that people take that phrase somewhat lightly and can be accused of greenwashing. So we call this session today Creating the Sustainable Law Firm. And I think there will be people watching our discussion today who are kind of keen to provide some structure and framework around how they take their firms forward in a sustainable way. And I'm that word in accordance with how you'll probably define it. So let me put the focus on you now and just perhaps tell us a little bit about your background before we delve into this. How did you get into working with the Legal Sector Alliance in Australia?
Well, yeah, look, I've been a sustainability professional for, I haven't counted it up recently, but for probably, almost 20 years now. I was a corporate banker as a graduate and spent about 7 years in corporate banking before I realised the world didn't need any more corporate bankers. And I followed a passion to do some further education and get involved in environmental sustainability. That led me to organisational sustainability. So pretty early on, I've been working with organisations from local governments to state governments to law firms and all sorts of different organisations to help them understand the issues of sustainability, the benefits of engaging with sustainability for their organisations, and then the structures and mechanisms and processes that they need to have in place to be effective and efficient too in terms of implementing sustainability programs. So my background, I'm a professional kind of sustainability person for organisations for a long time.
So tell us about the Australian Legal Sector Alliance. It's been going, I understand it, for about 10 years now, and it sort of grew initially from the UK version, the Legal Sector Alliance. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, the inspiration for the Australian Legal Sector Alliance was from a UK model. There is an organisation in the UK now called the Legal Sustainability Alliance.
Yeah.
That model was brought over to Australia by the Law Institute of Victoria, who partnered with a sustainability foundation called Net Balance. And basically, what they did is they put together association, if you like. So basically, that's what we are: an association of law firms. Our members are law firms, not individual lawyers. Association of law firms that were interested in progressing their own sustainability and being more sustainable as organisations. Because we kind of imported that model initially from the UK, that was very much focused on a environmental, and then the UK program at the moment is purely much focused on climate action at the moment. Our model has evolved to kind of follow, I guess, what a lot of corporates in Australia were doing at the time, and thinking about sustainability more broadly in terms of the sustainability of how they treat their people, the sustainability of how they interact with their community and contribute to their community, and how they manage their organisations, as well as the environmental sustainability. So we've moved now, as I say, into kind of a four-pronged people, community, environment and governance, which is a very solid model used internationally for sustainability.
Yeah, so a broader sort of remit, if you like, and I will go into each of those four, I think, a little bit later in our chat. But am I right in thinking you're an independent, not-for-profit enterprise, and that you're resourced by your member firms?
Yeah, that's right. So we're an association of law firms. We're pretty much owned by the law firms. We have a board of law firm members. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're also a charitable organisation, not that we seek donations or anything, but so basically, yeah, we're fully funded by the annual subscriptions of our law firm members. There's 47 current members of AusLSA. Typically our law, yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, no, I didn't say anything. It was me moving something this end. Sorry.
I was just going to say that typically the profile of the types of law firm members that we have, they're from the sort of the larger law firms in Australia. So generally, in general, over 50 law firms, although we have a handful of law firms that are below 50 kind of practicing lawyers, but generally it's those law firms that are a little larger and have some of the kind of management bandwidths, I suppose, to start dealing strategically with some of these issues and systematically with some of these sustainability issues.
And they all share, I guess, one thing, and that's a commitment to sustainability, as you might define it in those four areas. Just a question off the bat here: is creating the sustainable law firm an expensive exercise?
That is a it depends question, definitely. So yeah, there's certainly very inefficient ways and very ineffective ways of burning through not just money but opportunity. Like change and like what sustainability does require is an organisational kind of redirect, or it requires organisational change. And if you're in a large organisation with a lot of resources tied up to a specific direction, changing that direction, obviously there's a cost to that. There's a cost in terms of money, there's a cost in terms of resources, but there's also an opportunity cost if you don't change. So the it depends question is there a cost? Well, definitely there is some time and effort required. There'll be financial costs as well along that journey as well, but there's certainly costs to exposing yourselves to risk, to losing market share, to doing all those other things that we would argue will greatly outweigh the cost of being a little bit more progressive.
And presumably, much of this is being driven by the expectations of various stakeholders looking to their law firms to set an example in this area.
Yeah, and that's a really kind of evolving or maturing kind of driver for law firms. Like if you had have asked me 15 years ago about law firms and their values, and then if you kind of did a survey, for example, of law firms and their values maybe 15 years ago, and you did the same survey today, I think you would say that probably there's not a lot of difference in terms of how law firms would have articulated their values, because they would have been fairly generic and, these are the things we value. But what has changed is, I think, what sits behind those values and the sort of energy and the commitment that sits behind those values and how they can demonstrate that they're living those values. So there's a little bit more substance behind the values. So, and what's driving that, and getting back to the question about the drivers, what's driving that is expectations of the stakeholders and that their customers, they're more increasingly, they're even staff members, the people that are in the team, and they're not just staff members of junior associates and the incoming graduates. The partners are expecting these things as well. So it's management's expecting it, owners are expecting it, employers are expecting it, and certainly clients are expecting it, but they're expecting it in a different way. They're not just expecting to see that value statement in a frame on the wall somewhere, they're actually expecting to see some demonstration of that happening on the ground, and
right.
That's changing.
So you mentioned the 47 odd member firms that you have, and they're probably from the larger end of town, but is what we're talking about today just as applicable to smaller or mid-sized firms who might be tuning in?
Absolutely. So our basic argument is, and we've changed a little bit in terms of how we think of this, but part of how we would promote Oslo, say, in the past was making this discussion about what is the business case for being a more sustainable organisation? Why would you do it? What are the problems on the earth that you're addressing? What are customers expecting? All those sorts of things. We don't do that anymore, because if law firms kind of need to come to the party with that kind of belief themselves in terms of why they want to change, the understanding of what's in it for them. Because without that, that's the gas in their tank in terms of making the engine. But in terms of the programs that we run, that they're designed to be streamlined, efficient, and effective. So, if once you get to that starting line saying we need to make change and we're willing to invest in that organisational change, then a tool like I was saying, and for law firms, we are the only kind of tool in town, is really, you can either build these processes yourself and try and learn as you go and put the time and resources into doing that, or you can just use the tool that's off the rack. And there's a huge amount of efficiency in using those tools. What I would say is, for an organisation, if you're going to put resources into change, then you need to be actively managing that change. You need to put some structure and some strategic kind of import into that. And so that requires some structures, and they're the sorts of things that we provide. That we provide both the tools and resources and the frameworks that save you having to go and research and invent and trial and error and all those sorts of things. So definitely for smaller law firms, if for smaller law firms that don't plan to do much, probably it's not their program. But if they actually want to make some change, then it is the most efficient way to go about that.
So your organisation is called the Australia Legal Sector Alliance. We've had this conversation before. Is there any movement towards renaming it the Australasian Legal Sector Alliance?
Well, it's embarrassing that you might ask me this question, because I have been discussing in a very stop-start manner with a group of New Zealand law firms what would need to happen to our program to make it useful and valuable for law firms. And look, when I say it's stop-start, we've spent a lot of time looking at this, so we've kind of arrived at a decision to go down that path. It's just a matter of eking out enough time in our own in everyone's diaries to kind of really just to quantify the exact changes and do the work we need to do to the Australian program and launch it out there in New Zealand. So it's definitely a watch this space, and embarrassing for me because I just haven't spent enough time to progress it at the speed that we all want to happen.
So anyone watching from New Zealand, don't tune out. Stay with us, because what you're going to say, I think, is probably just as applicable to New Zealand firms as well, who might be listening, or indeed anyone in the UK for that matter. Yeah,
well, the UK firms possibly as well, but certainly for New Zealand firms, I don't think there's a legal sector that's closer in nature, or a community or a set of stakeholders or a set of staff members that are more kind of culturally and commercially and marketing wise kind of aligned to kind of the Australian experience. So it's always been on our radar in terms of the obvious next step.
Yes. Yeah.
And the easiest next step to take.
So it's interesting, you and I first chatted about this probably about 4 years ago, I think, pre-COVID, and I had downloaded your annual report, which I found was absolutely superb sort of overview in terms of some of the protocols and the reporting by your members in terms of what they were doing to make their firms more sustainable. And coincidentally, I understand today your 2023 report's been released. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is a bit of a great day for us. So today, we're releasing our new report. And look, you're right, our report exists for a number of reasons. Initially, it was a report that was really based around giving a channel for all our members to pull together their own sustainability commitments and performance and report them in a kind of a like way. Yeah. The things that AusLSA provides, and one of the really kind of important things that we do, putting reporting aside for one stage, is that our framework is consistent. So all members report against a consistent set of issues.
Yes.
But the way we report on those sort of things is also consistent. So we ask for reporting in the same way, with the same methodology, with the same algorithms, with the same kind of measures. So that means that law firms can compare themselves to other law firms. And that's not important. Well, it's important from our perspective, from a kind of a strategic planning perspective, that law firms can learn from other law firms and can see what different law firms are doing and use those as examples. What it's not for is it's not there for league tabling. It's not there for saying, well, we're better than them because we're doing this and they're not doing that. That's the beautiful thing about Australian law firms, though, is that whilst Australian law firms compete hard, there seems to be a sort of maturity or a kind of class about the way law firms can collaborate on one side and work honestly, certainly around issues like this in a non-competitive way. Whereas if I was to take this, just between, us law or industry people to another sector, like, the accounting firms, for example, I think it would be a whole new cup of tea, because they tend to sort of be a lot more competitive and a lot in areas that are non-core, like sustainability. So our report, though, yes, released today, and it's designed to be a compendium of a channel for all members to bring together, and we bring those together and do the crunching of the numbers and the preparation of the dashboards and things for all our members. But we also consolidate that together so we can say some things about what's happening to the industry in general in Australia. And generally, our reports also have gone into the how and why. So what is the general challenge, for example, to choose gender equality, for example? We would go through what's happening in gender equality broadly across the country, what's happening in the legal sector more generally, what's happening with our members, and then what are the challenges and opportunities. So there's a little bit of the why and the how, and then the equity and performance. So they are kind of quite good annual kind of summaries of sustainability in the legal sector in Australia.
Good job. I mean, I obviously haven't seen the 2023 one. It's probably not even available on your website yet. Will it be available like next week?
By the end of today. Yeah, today's release date.
26th of November. There we go. So yeah, so I interestingly, I downloaded in preparation for our chat today your 2022 report, which I thought was really engaging, and in which your group, the Australia Legal Sector Alliance, outlined its vision for the future and its mission in very simple terms. So it was real clear to the reader to say, this is what we're about, this is what we're trying to do. But also in terms of the four pillars that you talked about earlier, people, community, environment, and governance, I really like the fact that there were some examples in there in terms of initiatives that firms are engaging in to help make the world a more sustainable place, if you like. Presumably your new report has still got examples of what firms are doing in those four areas.
Yeah, certainly from the individual dashboards perspective, and also we've combined the information, taken a slightly different approach with this year's report. In all previous reports, we've kind of delved into each of our 21 issues in quite a lot of detail and provided a lot of background. That information doesn't change from year to year. So this year we've actually we've written four different kind of thought pieces or themed around some of our major priorities. So this year we've worked with 14 different collaborators and authors across the sector to write articles about Indigenous reconciliation, very topical in Australia over the last few months and going forward, but also climate action, the Sustainable Development Goals, and modern slavery and managing the risks of modern slavery in the law firm. So four sort of we call them spotlight articles that really delve in and talk to different kind of stakeholders and different practitioners that are actually implementing that in law firms. So that's an additional layer this year. So we'll be promoting those.
That's great. Can we just visit each of those four pillars and maybe just give us some examples of what firms are doing in this area? If we start with people, I know last year they're talking about things like parental leave, LGBT, well-being, and so on. Are these similar trends, or are there some things that have arisen this year that are in your report?
Yeah. So in terms of, I guess, the headline change for this report, and you're quite right, they're the kind of areas that we deal with in that pillar. We deal with sort of diversity and inclusion, and so that includes gender equality, includes broader diversity and inclusion around cultural and a whole lot of other issues. LGBTI we split out specifically because law firms are very, very active in Australia in LGBTI diversity and inclusion programs, but also wellbeing, psychological wellbeing, physical wellbeing. Yeah. And we do collect information as well on professional development, but it's just we don't include that in our report at the moment. So public report. So of those sectors, I would say law firms have been over the last, well, since my time at AusLSA, and even since the AusLSA report has been there, it's been a big focus for law firms. They know the value of their people. They understand the breadth of that value, and they understand the value of everyone being engaged and productive in a law firm. And all those areas are really critical areas. And they also potentially, not begrudgingly, but in some of those areas, there's been incremental change over the acceptance of things like gender equality and the importance of those sorts of things. So the major things that probably we've seen that the report shows this year is the headline figure. The thing that stood out for me was, and I don't have the figures in front of me, I'm sorry, is a major increase in parental leave. Yeah. And both primary and secondary parental leave. Secondary parental leave almost doubled. In terms of the average secondary parental leave doubled by firms, went from about 6 to 12 weeks on average. So that was a really staggering figure to see over a 12-month window. This is not over 5 years or anything. This is over a 12-month window. And primary parental leave went up by about 3.5 weeks as well. So the really big changes in looking after parents and wanting to be well, I guess that's an indicator, a lead indicator of wanting to be a family-friendly firm. The other things where the other kind of headline figure is that each year, probably, for the last 7 years since we've been measuring the gender equality, is the actual one of the headline figures we use is the proportion of females in partnership, and that's been going up by just over 1% per year, gradual climb. Because imagine it's a big change for an organisation, and it's got, you know, some of these issues have long lead times in terms of bringing people into partnership. So that's been a big one. But there was a 2%. So but in the last sort of 5 years, that's really gone up by almost 10%. So that's a really big change. Last year we indicated we tried to find a better lead indicator for what's actually happening and the changes happening in law firms. So this year, almost 60% of promotions to senior executive and partner level were female. So you can sort of see those shifts happening around gender equality. But whilst there hasn't been a big change in some of these other issues like psychological well-being, for example, and diverse, these things are like there's a pretty high maturity of those sort of programs, so they're kind of operating at a pretty high level, and the report shows, you know, the level of saturation occurs to me. It's not saturation; it's just the you know, quite comprehensive programs that are in place.
Yeah. Let's talk about community now. Any sort of you know, lead points here this year in terms of whether it's pro bono or volunteering or Indigenous rights?
Yeah, look, a big focus of not just law firms but of the Australian community has been on our Indigenous rights over the last 12 months, or over the last several years, and you may have heard in New Zealand and elsewhere that we had a referendum on establishing a voice to Parliament and providing formal recognition of First Nations people, which failed. So that was a real wake up for people, not just for, you know, us all as individuals, and obviously devastating for First Nations people who are campaigning in that area. But for all of us, it was a bit of a shock, a bit of a rude awakening that we thought as a country that we're perhaps progressing faster than we were, which then shone, I guess, showed the mirror up to law firms and their sorts of programs in terms of saying, well, we thought we were doing enough to make this move happen. Turns out the move's not happening. So the article, for example, provides a lot of information in terms of you know, what law firms need to do differently and how they need to recommit to kind of move this conversation and understanding of First Nations issues and reconciliation on. It's too early for that obviously to show up in our report in terms of the data, but that's the discussion. Look, there's a, you know, there is we've got a process in Australia called reconciliation planning. It's a formal process managed by by Reconciliation Australia, which is the peak body for reconciliation of First Nations people. All those indicators are growing. There's some good signs coming out of there, but obviously the big bump in the road has shown us that what we're doing is not enough. Yep. But in other areas like pro bono, for example, you know, that's measured. You know, the achievement of a 35 per lawyer per year target for pro bono is being, you know, met by more and more firms each year, as is the sort of total number of hours per person as well. So, so law firms generally, you know, in the community space, you know, the other thing to say about community too is that a big part of what law firms do to the community is either a sort of fundraising or foundations that are either, you know, in those sort of financial giving programs, and volunteering. And they took a real knock during COVID. People weren't in the office to participate in funding and fundraising. So those sorts of things have kind of really started to ride out, and people are back on board with those as well.
Yeah, and I imagine COVID would have skewed your figures as well in terms of environment, things like carbon emissions, particularly, because that in that pillar there, I understand you introduce measures regarding paper reduction, electricity, renewables, and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So what we're seeing, and what we kind of expected to see as kind of, well, it's not business as normal, but as people started to return to the office in Australian cities, that we would see a bump in some of the resources that we use. So definitely we saw over the years from 2019, 2020, 21 and 22, huge reductions in travel emissions, in energy, electricity emissions from offices, and certainly in paper as well. What we've seen this year is unsurprisingly increases in our law firms' gross greenhouse gas emissions, and that's been driven by an increase in travel. So I think there's been a kind of a sort of an unmet demand for travel over the last few years, and there's been a bit of catch up. And whether that travel's about sort of servicing clients directly on matters, or whether it's just about going out and building relationships and doing some of those sorts of things, there is a bit of catch up. So we've seen an increase, a doubling of travel emissions between this year and last year. But last year, a very, very low base. This year, but what we're actually seeing is that the travel has only risen to half of where it was in 2019. So we're kind of rebounding, and we don't know how far we're going to rebound, and we don't know how much the systems, like, you know, the sort of travel-free kind of systems to run matters and to build relationships with clients, we don't know how much of those are going to be bedded in and stay the course, and how much of them are going to just evaporate when people can jump on a plane again. So it's unsurprising to see a bump. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see whether that's a trend back to business as normal, or whether that's obviously we hope it's not. And we're saying the same. So this year we had a 5% increase in our paper use, but once again, it's fallen off a cliff since 2019 to almost zero. So basically, if we go back to 2019, our fall in paper use from 2019 is 1,200%. Reduction in paper use. So even that 5% is off a very low base. Our decrease in travel is still well below 50% of the 2019 pre-COVID number as well. So
significant advancement since 2019.
Absolutely, yeah. But obviously, it would be nice to have a very flat trend. Oh, sorry, a very predictable trend line back to this figure. Unfortunately, we've had a COVID dip and now a rebound, so it's a bit harder to read the data in terms of kind of where that's going to head us. But, you know, all signs are, in terms of climate freak, choosing that as an example, there's more and more firms signing up to climate targets themselves. There's certainly more offsets being bought each year. There's more firms buying renewable electricity for their electricity demand. So between targets and then firms jumping on board with some of the low-hanging fruit, the signs are that you know, greenhouse gas emissions from law firms will be, you know, back on the down.
The last pillar, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so very briefly, but the last pillar deals with issues regarding governance. Do you want to just tell us very briefly about that aspect?
Yeah, well, look, governance is important because it comes down to what we were talking before, that if you want to make organisational change and you want to be a sustainable organisation, it's really, really important to have management systems and processes, policies, programs, and people accountable, all those sorts of things. That sits in governance. I guess the two key areas that sit in governance that are important is sustainability reporting. So how do firms outside of the AusLSA program gather the sustainability information, report on their sustainability information, and manage those sorts of things? So look, there's not a lot of progress this year. What we're seeing as one of the lead indicators is how people take their AusLSA information and promote it and provide it to their stakeholders. That's growing each year, as are firms that are participating in other reporting programs. So there's lots of other sustainability programs that are coming up now. There's on the horizon, sustainability reporting is about to go through a mandatory kind of step change in terms of mandatory reporting. It'll start with climate. It's already happened with modern slavery in Australia, modern slavery risk in Australia. So there's a lot of that stuff that's going to happen in reporting. The other really important part of the governance section is how you manage your supply chain. So we all know as law firms, we all think as law firms that if we manage what we kind of can manage in terms of our own consumption, that's the biggest game in town. What we're learning is that probably for law firms, around 2/3 is actually in the supply chain. You know, the products and services that you engage to provide your own services provide a really big impact. So managing that for human rights and for environmental issues and a whole lot of other issues is really important as well. So that sits in governance.
Terrific. So we're virtually out of time here, but for firms who might be sort of dabbling in this area and perhaps haven't got a framework to work with, and I'm thinking particularly of New Zealand firms that may not have the benefit of the support that you can offer Australian firms, but hopefully soon they will be able to have that. Some tips from you as we wrap up here. Download the report, presumably, have a look at what other firms are doing.
Yeah, look, definitely there's in this year's report and certainly last year's report, there's a whole lot of information. It's not a manual, but there's a whole lot of information about what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Yes. So certainly some things you can take from that. we hope to be in New Zealand really soon, so you can have direct access to our online tools. I mean, we've got an online environmental management tool as well as our broader sustainability ESG tool to help you manage, monitor, and benchmark and progress, as well as our reporting. So, look, what's my advice? Certainly read our report. Hopefully that we might be able to provide a link when you circulate your this recording today. But certainly read our report, but reach out to me. And get on the Oslo SA newsletter, which is a monthly newsletter, and get in touch with me so I can follow up with you if you're interested in participating when we actually hit the ground, boots on the ground in New Zealand.
Fantastic. So the best link for the website
is just legalsectoralliance.com.au.
And for you personally?
Yeah, just feel free to give me a buzz on richard@legalsectoralliance.com.au.
Fantastic. Well, that's it. That's a great starting point for people. And look, really appreciate you coming on Law Chat and giving us a bit of an overview there. Exciting times with these this new report coming out today. I look forward to downloading that. But let me just say on behalf of all the viewers, thanks for coming on, Richard. Keep up the good work, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Thanks.
All right, take care. Thanks very much now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.